G'day. How you going? Good, thanks. Gareth from BTA here. 5 minute fundamentals. Happy Friday. What's going on? First of all, just quickly, I wanted to just give a shout out to Mr. Shane Danger Coleman. A lot of people know, well, I would say, the majority of people in the industry know Shane. And for our international people, if you don't know Shane Danger Coleman, who you will be able to search with marine aquariums or reef aquariums, and you will find a lot of information that comes up. Shane does a lot for our industry, and he's been kicked in the guts a few times recently. He got his first ute stolen, that got thrashed. Then he drove down to Sydney, bought a new ute, drove it all the way, flew down to Sydney, drove it all the way back to Cairns, and 3 days or a week later or something like that, got flogged again, got stolen, and someone just walked in and took his keys and, took his ute. So, insurance is going to pay for it, but he's had to pay the excess, and that was, money he was going to use for upgrades, which is not fair. You don't touch a man's automobile, okay? You just don't. It's not right. So the bloke hates charity, and we've already, strong-armed him into, well, a couple of other people, not me, have strong-armed him into, on a technicality, taking some money for, his accessories and things like that. So that was fair enough. I just wanted to mention it because he does a lot for the industry and he deserves recognition, and he's had a really shit go the last couple of months. And just maybe next time you see Shane, you can't miss him. He's just an absolute dead set legend. He's a character. The hair, the whole, get the tats, man. You can't miss him. He is a legend. He's a dead set champion. And so next time you see him, maybe buy him a sugarcane champagne, or donate to your nearest to your favourite reef restoration, initiative, or to a mental health or charity, or buy a membership in MAFA or something like that. Come along to the Blue Light District Coral Show at Fish Are Friends, and maybe get in there and have a good time, and bring your kids along, get them into marine aquariums, because that's all he wants to see. He just wants to see young fellas and young boys and girls get into marine aquariums and enjoy it as much as we do. And if you do a donation on his behalf, tax deductible. So, you're a good bloke, Shane. You're a legend. Okay? Enough said, really. You're a real good bloke, and you've had a shit go. So, Moving on. 5-minute fundamentals today. I want to talk about buffering capacity, or carbon hardness, KH, alkalinity. All these terms are used interchangeably. There are some slight differences between them, being that alkalinity could be termed as the total buffering capacity: bicarbonates, carbonates, borates, phosphates, whatever it might be. But when we're talking about water, we use these terms interchangeably, and we're pretty much just talking about adding buffer to control pH and KH. Okay. So, KH is the measure of bicarbonates and carbonates in the water that allow the pH to stay stable. Why is it important? Because an unstable pH is very bad, and that can cause stress to your fish, as well as if your KH and your pH get too low, obviously it goes out of the optimum operating range of your nitrifying bacteria, and KH, or alkalinity, adds bicarbonates to the water, which nitrifying bacteria use as a food source, as an inorganic carbon source. Okay. Now, if the biological stability of a system could be considered the beating heart of the system, then your carbonates and bicarbonates and alkalinity system, and maintaining that, could be considered the blood. Okay, so if you don't have bicarbonates in the water and an inorganic carbon source for your bacteria, they cannot nitrify effectively or at all, and that's where you get a pH crash. Where you get a biofilter crash. Your pH crash has already happened. Okay, your pH crash is below 6 at a level of at a KH of, 50 parts per million, 40, not 50, maybe 30 parts per million, okay? And then it continues to drop from there, and then you get swings all the time, okay? Now, before we go into it, people will say, well, we have fish that are, in a low pH environment, such as the Amazon, or where discus come from, characteristically, where the pH is 4 and very tannin stained and things like this, and they survive fine there. And why can't we keep them in an aquarium? Well, because they're in a river and the water gets replenished constantly, so their waste is getting flushed constantly. The plants are taking out the nutrient as well, and the stocking density characteristically is a hell of a lot lower than in our aquariums. So you're talking about a natural environment that has its own filtration and nutrient export system versus a closed system, okay? So regardless or not, the fact of the matter is we need to maintain KH in some form or another, okay? So how does KH work in relation to pH? Well, there's another thing that we need to take into account, and that's CO2. Okay, so when CO2 bonds with carbonates in the water, it creates carbonic acid. When CO2 bonds with water, it creates carbonic acid, and that lowers the pH. Okay, that is independent of the carbon hardness. All right, so you can have a KH of 60, 100, and you can have a pH of 7. Whereas naturally, usually without any CO2 in the water or without any phosphate-based buffers, which I'll get into in a sec quickly, you would be maintaining pH over 7.7, 7.8. Okay, so the CO2 artificially lowers the pH in relation to the KH, okay? And that's where I can generally see whether or not there's a CO2 problem before I, go buying electronic monitors with probes to measure the CO2 level, which costs thousands. Generally speaking, we can do a titrated test, or we can do a total gas pressure test, or we can look at this chart and just see, well, your pH should be a hell of a lot higher than it is. And we know these people, generally speaking, aren't throwing phosphate-based buffers into the water, so we can assume that it's CO2, and most of the time it is. This is why we have degassing units and things on aquaculture systems. This is why we recommend that you aerate and have gas exchange in your aquariums, okay? Same thing happens with CO2 in a planted aquarium. So you increase the KH and use CO2 to artificially bring that down so that your pH is very stable, but it's set by the amount of CO2 going in. That's where you have those little indicators that show the pH, because the amount of CO2 going in determines the amount of carbonic acid going in. Without electronically controlling that, it's hard to tell, so you just do it by eye. Generally speaking, as long as you maintain your KH, it stays the same. This is why with some plant nutrient systems, they say if your pH starts to drop, add buffer, in some systems it's a potassium-based buffer like potassium hydroxide or liquid potassium hydroxide or something like that. It could be, usually speaking, it's not a sodium-based buffer, but calcium carbonate, something like that. Very small amounts, and that brings the KH back up, which sets the CO2, brings it back into equilibrium. So yeah, that's to explain that part. Obviously, in most systems, except for a planted system, we want to get rid of that CO2. So we need to, degas the water and create water movement and surface agitation and things like that. The types of KH buffers for aquariums and aquaculture, generally speaking, we're talking about commercially based buffers in aquariums. You'll usually find them a lot of the time you will find them packaged under certain brands with certain blends and things like that. Generally speaking, sodium bicarbonate, sodium carbonate, calcium carbonate, so crushed coral, things like that, in small amounts. If you know how to use that, don't do it unless you're very experienced. And then you can get substrates that buffer and things like that. But generally speaking, safe ones are sodium bicarb, so stick to that. And as your knowledge increases, you can increase it from there. There is some things that we need to do that we need to go over beforehand. However, general hardness is not alkalinity in KH. General hardness is the measure of, in a test kit, predominantly calcium and magnesium ions in the water. and with electronic conductivity, it's, you know, sodium and whatever else. General hardness typically doesn't drop very quickly. It does get absorbed by plants and fish and, you know, crustaceans and magnesium and other salts and minerals and things like that. But generally speaking, not as quickly as pH does. That gets eaten away very quickly, KH and pH. But, you know, just don't confuse the two. Now, there's different ranges for different aquariums. Planted tanks, you know, a DKH of about 3 to 5, which one DKH is 17.89 parts per million, I think, somewhere around there. I'm going to talk in ppm, just generally speaking, about 50 ppm for planted aquariums and freshwater aquariums. Cichlids are, you know, up to 100 or more. Marine aquariums can be, you know, 150 to 180 sometimes less, sometimes a little bit more. Now, the most important thing to remember here is the dissolved ions in relation to general hardness, because we need to have magnesium in the water to have an effective buffer system, and we want to make sure that we don't get out of ionic balance, i.e. add too much calcium, add too much magnesium, add too much potassium, obviously, because we don't want too much in there, but magnesium prevents calcium carbonate precipitation, but if the ionic balance gets out, you start to get calcium carbonate precipitation, and that's not good. So magnesium and calcium give your fish a balanced amount of salts and minerals in the water, whether it's aquariums or aquaculture. It just makes sense for the health of the fish, unless of course you've got those in your bore water or your supply water. So the only other thing is symptoms of a low pH is that or a low KH, is that one, you will have a low pH. Secondly, you will see that your ammonia will slowly start to rise and your fish will start to stress out, especially if they're not used to a low pH environment. Your pH will jump all over the place. Generally, your fish will, your system will start to bloom algae. Things just won't look great. They just won't look clean and healthy. So it's very important that you monitor KH. This isn't witchcraft. This is chemistry. Okay, it's just the fundamentals of it. So yeah, if you don't have a KH/carbon hardness test kit, go and get one. If you don't have a pH test kit, you should definitely get one and test them in relation to each other. And, you know, just make sure that you're adding some magnesium and calcium and different salts and minerals and stuff. You know, you don't have to go overboard. Don't add too much sodium chloride or anything like that. Do your research, but it all sort of works into the same sort of system here. Now, the only thing other than that is an artificial buffer, like a sodium biphosphate, based buffer, or something along those lines. You will find that that will artificially decrease the pH and keep it there without having to use CO2, which is important in high density situations if you're trying to artificially lower the pH. But the disadvantage of that is that you get phosphate in the water, and if you have problems with algae, that's an issue. So if there's anything that you do this week, go and understand the pH, KH, CO2 relationship. Go and understand the different sorts of buffers you can use, the different pKa ratings and pHs they can reach to. For example, if you add the same amount of sodium bicarbonate that you do sodium hydroxide, sodium bicarbonate's, you know, going to reach a maximum pH of 7.8, 8.2 maybe. Sodium hydroxide, on the other hand, will reach a pH of 12 for the same molar amount of, you know, stuff that you're putting in. So know what you're using, know the safety requirements of what you're using, and if you ever have any questions, just give me a yell. This is run way over time, but, you know, it's Friday, and no one's working on a Friday. It'll be our secret. Okay, just come in. You act like you're having coffee and you're educating yourself, but really you're just having a great time. So don't tell the boss. Okay, so yeah, have a great day, guys. Fantastic educational segment today. Happy Friday, and we'll see you. Peace.